Echoes Hugh. Audio Productions. Smooth, sweet sounds. Echoes Hugh Audio Productions proudly presents a J.S. Mensah audio work.
Hi everybody, and welcome to my brand new podcast, Would You Adam and Eve It, with me, Del McCamley. Keep up to date with content from Echoes Hugh Audio Productions by following us on TikTok, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, YouTube and Facebook. Don't forget to follow, like and comment. In the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be talking about issues that affect us all on a national, local and global level. As the famous Blues Brothers once said, issues that affect you, me, them, everybody. Because everybody needs somebody. Somebody to love, miss and kiss and keep you all clued up as just what the hell is going on out there. Because if I don't tell you, then nobody will. Definitely not any of our competitors. So sit back, kick back, relax, grab yourself a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, glass of whiskey, glass of vodka. Oh, glass of whiskey, glass of vodka? What the hell? Who starts drinking at this time of the day? What? My producer just said everybody. No, man, that's not true. Not everybody. Anyway, just relax and know that Del is going to get in there and wiggle and jiggle out the workings of just what the heck is going on in that jolly game we call life. You know it makes sense. So stick with me. I'll put you right. What makes an ethical society? And can we call ourselves such if we base our judgments at a face value level? Ethics. What ethics is the essential guidelines for a just society, promoting, if possible, the good stuff that's essential to human well-being and proposes guiding principles to generate an ethical culture. Ethics also refers to the specific values, standards, rules and agreements that people adopt for conducting their lives. Ethics, more broadly, is the study of human behaviour and its consequences in the light of what is ideally possible. I would say, as a rule, we would all like to think that we act appropriately and fairly to others. Ethics and morality entreat us all to give up our own self-interests for the benefit of the greater good, or, to be specific, for the good of our society. We like to think of the concept of ethics as being everywhere and in most things that surround us, how we treat our fellow human beings, in our use of AI. Even businesses and government agencies profess to adhere to a code of ethics. For example, ethicists, the people that study ethics, might analyse a society's mores or morals to determine what effect they would have on humankind if they were used as a universal standard. Is one set of what's termed as ethics in one society acceptable in other cultures? Ethics are not merely social conventions like table manners, things like that. Rather, ethics define the social conditions necessary for human beings to thrive. The 16th century philosopher David Hume spoke about the idea of ethics through a set of hypothetical notions, suggesting that all of our actions are caused. The theory behind this was that if they weren't a byproduct of causal circumstances and events, then all of our actions would be unpredictable. Makes sense? Sort of. My producer's looking at me with a puzzled expression on his face. In other words, if the causes of our actions are shaped by the events around us, which in turn mould our personalities, then we must be held responsible for everything and anything we do in our lives. Yeah? Would you agree? If I start beating up random people in the street because I like violence and seeing people suffering, then my violence is the cause of my acting like a lunatic, and therefore I must be responsible for it. But if I use violence against selected people, either through self-defence or I've been threatened with greater violence against me by others if I don't, then I'm not responsible because the causal chain of events lies outside of me. Whatever we do in our lives or society has a profound effect on others around us. I'm not saying that we should all be and adhere to the existence of total congeniality and goodness, because in all manner of circumstances, that would be nigh impossible. But what about if we base our judgments on others through how we perceive their behaviour and don't take into account the fundamental reason behind that behaviour? Are we truly an ethical and moral society if we don't take into consideration the diverse reasons for that behaviour? For example, the human brain works in complex ways. Our emotional responses originate from the limbic system deep within it. Our anger and fear stem from something called our amygdala. Following on from that, the reward centre of our brain is the ventral striatum. The frontal cortex, right at the front of our foreheads, helps us work out how we rationalise and satisfy our desires. If we want something, we work out the best method of getting it in a rational manner. Over the years, there's been a lot of research into how the impulse control function of our frontal cortex behaves. If the frontal cortex has been injured, either through some kind of contusion, then your impulse control is going to be fairly crummy. Now, here's where we get to the problems connected to ethics and morality. Some of the many factors linked to a damaged frontal cortex can either be neglect, abuse, poor diet, or a total lack of micronutrients like lithium. It can also be due to environmental pollution, amongst other things, lead and nitrous oxides. This horrendously dovetails with my previous discussion about illegal vaping, and don't even get me started on the shocking statistics on our teenagers inhaling nitrous oxides through mini gas canisters or smart whip tubes. So, if we're judging ourselves as an ethical and moral society in the way we treat others, then surely we need to put issues like social inequality under the microscope, bringing these matters into sharp scrutiny. When large groups within society are afflicted with the consequences of poverty, and you only have to look around you folks to know this is the naked truth, then why do we have little or no tolerance for actions that may be committed by those suffering? Researchers at the LSE found that in London, people from the highest socioeconomic class, doctors, lawyers, journalists, were 3 times more likely to be let off with a caution for drug offences than people who are unemployed. Evidence suggests that experimenting with illegal drugs is roughly equal access to the socioeconomic spectrum, and regular drug use is more common amongst young people, but the vast majority of those in prison for drug offences are not from middle-class backgrounds. The more privileged your class background, the more likely it is that criminal behaviour of this age will be construed as a mistake, the product of youthful high spirits and something you'll inevitably grow out of. Mostly this seems to be an accurate assumption. So, ethics and morality, where are they? As I've just said, studies that have shown that social inequality could trigger your stress hormones, cortisol. Cortisol is a key neurotransmitter for the amygdala, which in turn produces serotonin. Serotonin acts as the fuel for your frontal cortex and the impulse control linked with it. Serotonin acts as a major calming agent within the brain. So basically, in a nutshell, if the cortisol levels aren't suitably balanced, then it messes with your serotonin, which can only result in your stress levels blowing open in serious ways. I mean like thermonuclear level. Anyway, back to the frontal cortex. The frontal cortex is what rationalises most of the situations you might find yourself in. Whenever something happens to you that might pull and strain on our emotions or spark anger inside us, the frontal cortex manages our irritability and tamps it down to acceptable levels. That doesn't mean that you're not vexed or ticked off, but it may stop you from seriously hurting someone. If, on the other hand, my frontal cortex is damaged in any way, then you have major problems in controlling your maddened condition to the point where you could get hauled before a judge and locked up. The philosopher John Stuart Mill, in his 1859 essay on liberty, stressed that Education and free debate are the prerequisites for the growth and development of the individual. Mill even went so far as to suggest that any state should fund such education for those who can't afford it. So, if we work out that irrational behaviour, often seen as negative, confrontational or downright savage behaviour, can be unearthed back to impaired rationality as a consequence of poverty, neglect or poor hygiene or nutrition, then as an ethical and moral society, shouldn't we just be a tad more lenient? Hume, remember him, the 16th century philosopher I opened with? Well, he came to the conclusion that human instinct veers more towards a notion of sympathy than self-interest. For him to say this when he did caused quite a bit of hubbub, to say the least, especially when we're all perceived as being selfish prats. Even in the 21st century, and especially when you consider the trials and tribulations of living in modern Blighty, we often still seem gripped by the idea that evolution can only infuse selfishness into our DNA. I'd further argue that a duty-based fairness towards others in any democratic society is an integral part of our evolutionary heritage. In other words, if we're kind towards each other, examining the frameworks of social and economic environment, then we're only going to advance as a civilization. But do we really do that? Don't we often view uncontrollable bouts of anger or unacceptable behaviour in terms of others less fortunate than ourselves as chavvy or scummy? You hear so many stories of the well-off being slapped on the wrist, while those less fortunate are given hefty sentences for crimes or transgressions being committed, that I would wonder where we're heading and what's become of us. Apparently, we're born with an innate sense of morality and integrity, but in so many of us, it tends to evaporate with age. Social psychology has shown that we all have a propensity to place the collective interests of groups to the forefront of our priorities, and this in turn can blossom and become expanded, which is why a lot of us go for cross-cultural, collaborative and pro-social activities. That makes sense. But often, it all depends on what and who constitutes a group. Think about the homeless or any others we deem to be seen beneath us. Sometimes we can be bleeding picky, even to the point where we target certain groups. This is when our moral perceptions can sometimes go skew with. So, do we have the moral instincts towards both individuals and towards our collective welfare? And is it our mission to construct a consensus which can guide and steer us towards the best fit proxy for what constitutes ethics and morality in this fair nation of ours? Should we practice our own culturally perceived morality to expand it to encompass everything? I don't know. You decide. The next time you're walking down the high street, driving in your car, sitting on public transport or doing anything that takes you out and about, then have a butcher's of what's going on around you and decide for yourself. Next time you're witnessing the transgressions of some poor homeless, drunk or some drugged up soul staggering along or muttering to themselves, just stop and think. Next time you see someone screaming their heads off outside your local fast food outlet or bashing their fists against a supermarket or abusing others around them, just stop and think. How are we judging them? Are we adhering to the standards of behaviour that ensure we're sticking to the ethical and moral constructs and standards of conduct that we should all use to judge what is right and what is wrong? Or are we simply mentally shaking our heads and tutting under our breaths? My argument is basically this. Although there's no universal definition of what exactly constitutes ethics and morality, they should both act as a guiding force towards dictating how we live and what we should do. The crumbling away of both of these commanding principles seems to be happening more and more in these troubled times. If not stamped out, it could only agitate the existing integrities and virtues that govern a civilised and democratic system, eventually spreading to all humans everywhere. If we're to identify what's wrong or right in our society, and if we want to mould our thinking towards standards of ethics and morality, which we all crave and long for in creating a harmonious society, then we need to understand that ethics and morality must play a crucial role to include everyone as a whole and should definitely prohibit any form of bias to any part of a civilization's community. We need to do that to eradicate any or all erosion of the ethics and morality that constitute our society if we want to move forward. If we don't, we're doomed. I've been Del McCamley, and this has been Would You Adam and Eve It? Don't be shy. Tune in for next time. See ya!
Thanks for listening to an Echoes Hue audio productions project. Smooth, sweet sounds. Keep up to date with content from Echoes Hue Audio Productions by following us on TikTok, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, YouTube and Facebook. Don't forget to follow, like and comment. Would You Adam and Eve It is written and presented by Dale McCamley. The podcast is directed and produced by J.S. Mensah. Our theme music is by Oleg Mazur.